Last year on May the 4th, I posted a video that asked the question, what's canon from LEGO Star Wars? I looked at elements introduced on the LEGO side of Star Wars that eventually made their way into the current Star Wars continuity. I also covered a small bit of LEGO's own original Star Wars storytelling, and even touched on some LEGO-like building toys in the Star Wars galaxy. And it's actually this point that caused me to want to revisit the subject again this year, but more on that later. At the time, I thought that I had covered just about all the relevant Star Wars/LEGO lore connections, but the folks in the comments brought in some fun stuff that I'd missed. Audionautix 950 mentioned that R2-R7 was a character first introduced in LEGO form. They're the green astrometric droid called out on the box of the 2007 7665 Republic Cruiser set. No such droid was seen on board the ship in the film itself, but this droid was later included in the 2008 complete Star Wars encyclopedia. It's just a minor entry, but it's noteworthy because unless the droid's name came from an unknown behind-the-scenes source, this is the only example I'm aware of where an original LEGO Star Wars character was included in the Star Wars Legends continuity. Blue Ninja 8094 pointed out that Paul Bettany's gangster character Dryden Vos from 2018's Solo: A Star Wars Story was the same species as a character created for a 2016 episode of LEGO Star Wars: The Freemaker Adventures. This is Nari, a Darksider who posed as a helpful Jedi during Rowan Freemaker's quest for the Kyber Saber. When showing her true colors as an angry Sith servant, Nari's facial markings change color just as Dryden Vos's does in Solo. After doing some digging, it turns out that this connection is very likely, but still unconfirmed. Voss would have originally been played by Michael Kenneth Williams, but was recast during reshoots after the film's original directors Chris Lord and Phil Miller were replaced by Ron Howard. This also resulted in the character's species being changed from a CGI alien to a more practical near human. The addition of the color-changing facial markings appears to be an even later addition, since Bettany says he wasn't aware of them until after his scenes had been shot, so these markings and their relationship to those seen on Nari remain something of a mystery. Lee Chi, longtime keeper of the official Lucasfilm continuity database, hinted on Twitter that there could be a connection behind the similar appearances of both characters. Since Chi also advises closely on the LEGO Star Wars animations, he would have been in a position to make the connection official either before or after the fact. Phil Lord and Chris Miller were also the directors of the LEGO movie, so there's a connection there as well. However, Chi later made it clear that he wasn't involved in the creative decision behind Voss's facial features, and Lord and Miller were likely off the film by the time the Voss character was changed. A connection to Nari was given as a possible explanation for Voss's appearance behind the scenes, but it's not clear if it was a direct reference. So there's no smoking blaster here, and the possible LEGO connection either as inspiration or as retcon remains likely, but unconfirmed. In last year's video, I had identified a possibly lost Star Wars character, the J1000 or J6000 supercomputer from the CD-ROM included in the 9748 Droid Developer Kit. There were a few folks who have offered to capture the tutorial levels from the CD-ROM to confirm this character's name. Not Project was actually able to do this, obtaining the footage seen here, but the voice lines proved to be corrupted, so we've yet to confirm the character's name. Keep trying, everyone. Just Nonsense mentioned a recurring Ithorian Jedi character named Rusty that led me down a fun rabbit hole. As it turns out, this guy's had a surprising number of adventures across several different incarnations of the Star Wars universe, beginning in the Legends continuity. He deserves his own video, so look for that in the near future. Kiadimundi 531 pointed out a crossover element between Star Wars Rebels and LEGO Star Wars that I find particularly unique and interesting. These super minor characters, Ricarda and Ron Ryal, were created by Martin Fisher for a Star Wars canon comic in Rebels magazine, and later continue their stories in LEGO form. These Rebel short comics are a bit of a rarity, as the magazine's English editions were cancelled while the German and Russian versions continued, so some of these comics weren't published in English until the release of the Rebels trade paperback. It's a pretty massive collection that's well worth tracking down if you're a fan of the show. Kiadimundi 531's comment convinced me to finally pull the trigger on this one. In Secrets of Sinar from Rebels Magazine number 13, Kanan and Zeb encountered Ron Ryal, one of Sinar's leading scientists, during their infiltration of an Imperial Sinar Systems factory. Under pressure, Ryal talks Zeb out of kidnapping him for his intel, revealing that he's aware that the Rebels have more of a conscience for the fates of individuals than the Empire does. In the Ryal defection from LEGO Star Wars number 38, Ryal makes the decision to defect to the Rebel Alliance with the help of Leia and Chewbacca. In Puffer Problems from Star Wars Magazine number 21, Lando Calrissian is transported to Lothal by Captain Ricarda aboard the Stellar Sun. Ricarda makes a detour for Lando to rescue his puffer pig and saves both Lando and the pig by the end of the story. In the comic The Best Builder from LEGO Star Wars number 28, she goes up against Xander Freemaker from the Freemaker Adventures in a building competition after she'd lost the Stellar Sun to another competitor. Both stories are set on Mertez, a planet that so far exists only in the LEGO continuity. These examples are interesting because while the medium is the same, the stories of these original characters are carried across two very different visual continuities. It's also interesting to see two such minor characters get LEGO designs. I'm glad the original Rebels comics have been collected, and I hope the LEGO comics will be too one day. Instagram pointed out a sneaky speeder set reference in the Star Wars Free Comic Book Day 2018 story Hunter vs. Hunted. The speeder bike Han pilots here is the same model as the one from the 2017 75167 Bounty Hunter Battle Pack. This is one of my favorite LEGO Star Wars sets. I picked it up because it includes almost all the bounty hunters from The Empire Strikes Back. I probably would have kept the bike assembled if I'd known about this connection. The reason this bike is included in the battle pack is because it's actually from an episode of the Freemaker Adventures, Season 2, Episode 6, Return to the Wheel, where this band of bounty hunters tries to recapture the Freemakers for Gabal the Hutt. You can see Bosk piloting the bike just as he does in the set, but only for a few seconds before he crashes it into a duvak and it explodes. While it's not part of canon, Mystery 8881 pointed out that the Darth Jar Jar skin from Fortnite seems to take some design cues from the LEGO minifigure version seen in the Rebuild the Galaxy animations and the 75389 Dark Falcon set inspired by the series. This makes sense as by the time Darth Jar Jar was added in 2025, most Fortnite skins had a LEGO counterpart for LEGO experiences, so the two skins would have been developed at the same time. Multiple people pointed out that the LEGO Force Awakens video game has several unlockable adventures that present side stories to the main film. I had initially overlooked these because it seemed like they were just adapting already existing stories. The Phantom Limb, for example, which explains how 3PO got his red arm, is an adaptation of the C-3PO Marvel Comics special of the same name. However, I had really underestimated just how much original material these levels included. Many of them, like the Crimson Corsair, Octagon Assault, and Rathar Hunting, don't appear to be adaptations of other stories and have yet to be presented in other media. There are also several details included first in the video game that only later appeared in canon media, such as Tuan Kati, the homeworld of the Rathars that Han was transporting in The Force Awakens. Now, a lot of this is probably from background material developed independently from the LEGO video game. Still, at least one planet, Karak, appears only in these levels and has only been referenced in canon by the official Star Systems of the Galaxy appendix. To top it all off, these levels featured lines specially recorded by the film's cast, including Harrison Ford and Anthony Daniels. And given how popular the LEGO Star Wars video games are, it's likely that this is the main form of reference for these adventures outside the film, even when they've been technically covered elsewhere. I learned a lot after looking into this, so thanks to everyone who pointed it out. Bowser II mentioned a LEGO illusion that had overlooked, Ben Solo's Cyril-form Cambi blocks from Daniel Jose Older's 2018 novel Last Shot. Here, Han Solo experiences one of those universal forms of pain known to all parents across space and time, stepping on your child's building blocks. I'd like to say things got easier for Han, but we all know how this ends. Cyril-form Cambi blocks is a mouthful, and since Ben is about 2 years old here, they're probably more like these alphabet Duplo bricks than anything else. As an in-universe description, I prefer the Chiss term building snaps that I mentioned in the previous video, but Cambi blocks isn't bad either. Cambi means change in Latin, making it a somewhat clunky but reasonable description for LEGO-like building bricks in the Star Wars galaxy. I'd also forgotten about this panel from the 2006 comic Tag and Bink, Revenge of the Clone Menace, which features younglings from the Bear Clan assembling a sizable Venator-class Star Destroyer from what appears to be a LEGO set. Now, the Tag and Bink comics are intended to be humorous romps very much outside either of the main Star Wars continuities, though the characters nearly made it into Solo, a Star Wars story. These kind of extra continuity sight gags were all over these comics, so LEGO as a brand probably doesn't exist in a galaxy far, far away, even in Legends. However, what really made me want to make this video is that I think I found a visual example of a LEGO-like building toy in the Star Wars galaxy, and it comes from a pretty surprising place. Yes, that's right, the 1978 Star Wars Holiday Special. Now, I'm not going to bore you with an entire video about one of the most infamous Star Wars stories of all time. That'll be the next video. All you need to know for now about the Holiday Special is that it was centered around the home and family of Chewbacca, including his son Lumpy. But as I was researching that video, I came across this behind-the-scenes image from this website celebrating the Star Wars Holiday Special. It's from a tribute to Patty Maloney, who played Lumpy and who passed away last year. This picture is from a scene where Lumpy finds that his room has been ransacked by Imperial stormtroopers. Way down here in the foreground, you can see what appears to be several LEGO-like bricks with studs and everything. So the question was, did they actually appear on camera in the special itself? Of course, I immediately pulled up the special to see if these bricks appeared on camera at all. Unfortunately, the 1970s off-air SD videotape quality just isn't clear enough to be sure. But based on the photograph, I think you can see that when Lumpy returns to his room here, and possibly here. I think that the stack of white and black objects seen in the background here are also probably some of the same bricks. There are gaps in the construction that I think would probably only work with studded building blocks. You can tell they're blocks by the way they fly apart when the trooper smashes them here. I had hoped, based on the vague blobby colors seen here, that maybe there was some classic space models somewhere in the background, but this doesn't appear to be the case. The blocks are too large to have been actual LEGO sets. I think a more likely candidate is Lock Blocks, the American name for Diablocks, a Japanese clone brand from Kawato. Lock Blocks had more prominent studs and also had green pieces in the 1970s. This color wasn't common in LEGO until decades later. From what I can tell, lock blocks were available in Sears and other American retailers, so they would have been a cheap, easy, more generic alternative to LEGO bricks. So there you have it. Not only have we seen LEGO continuing to influence the galaxy far, far away, we even have an example of LEGO-like toys in the galaxy far, far away. So whether they're LEGO bricks, building snaps, or Canby blocks, keep on creating. Which LEGO original characters, alternate models, or sets would you like to see make their way into canon? Did I miss any new crossovers between LEGO Star Wars and any version of the Star Wars continuity? Let me know in the comments. Please like and subscribe, check out the Patreon. May the Force be with you.